Yesterday he made this announcement.
Hey guys, I'm gonna flip the screen so you guys can watch Dr. Hill, I think.
And I'm appreciative of that. Now yesterday when I spoke to you and I walked off stage, I went right back to my hotel room where I spent until very late yesterday evening reviewing the research and reviewing all of the information I want to share with you. I went to bed late last night, and after a couple of hours of sleep, I woke up and was my mind churning again. I have felt like for a long period of time, and I want to do a little bit of a preface for the things that we'll be talking about today. For a long period of time, I felt like essential oils are wonderful in the full context of everything that we talk about, but there's so much information to learn. There is so much to know. Many of you have been very kind to me over the years as you've shared with me that you think I'm an expert. I learned yesterday in my review of all of this information, I don't feel like I know anything about essential oils. And maybe that's an indicator of where we really are in this process of essential oils. As much as we know and as much as we've experienced, we're really just in the very beginnings of this discovery that we have with the essential oils. And that carries with it a lot of opportunity and a lot of promise, but a great deal of responsibility. And so my invitation to you today is as we go through this process and as we revert back to more informational context, that you yourself will think about those ways in which you can do the exact same thing. That you'll embrace now this new opportunity to share information a little more openly and a little more engagingly. As I was working early this morning, I think it was about 5 at this point. I'd been up since 3, but I got a text from Mark at 5 o'clock this morning, wishing me good luck, which is attorney talk code for mind your P's and Q's, I will be there watching you. So let's get started. Now remember at convention a couple of years ago, we talked a lot about the endocannabinoid system. And we talked about it in the context of Copaiba essential oil and the value and benefit that we saw with Copaiba. And so I want to do a little bit of a review of that endocannabinoid system for you and perhaps give you a little bit more detail. The reason for the detail is that I think it's critical for the context that I'll be sharing with you today. But also this is an emerging science. This is new information. It's not been completely cataloged and it's not a closed chapter in any of the medical and scientific research that we look at. Instead, there's great opportunity to learn more. So you'll recall that I talked with you about CD1 and CD2 receptors. Now receptors at their core, you know what they are. This is where we activate different processes or activities within the body, generally specific to cells. For example, CD2 receptors are found specifically within the cell membrane of many different types of cells. And so receptors play a critical role in the body's ability to be able to react and respond to a changing need in a changing environment. Now I see that everybody's got their phones out and I'm extremely flattered, but I am going to say the one thing that Mark Wolford asked me to say. Now I'm just going to say it. It doesn't mean you have to listen to me, but I am going to say it, and that is you can't record this morning, Mark. Is that what you've asked me to tell them? But he just shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know, I don't really care. So let me just, if you're recording for your own reference, I think that's wonderful. If you're recording because you want to post and share, can I please ask you not to do that? We're going to have very open conversation today, a very directed conversation today. And I want to be able to do that freely. So let's talk about this system as a whole and give you a little bit more understanding. The endocannabinoid system, although it's varied and there's been a lot of implications associated with it, a lot of discussion about it, one of its main characteristics that you and I would be able to relate to very well in the context of what we do with essential oils and what we know about essential oils is it helps to establish homeostasis in the body. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. For example, if we have some type of an acute injury, we have some type of a response that's occurring in the body for healing to take place, it's the activation of the CB2 receptors that would communicate with several different cell types. could communicate with the immune cells, could communicate with the pro-inflammatory processes and block some of those processes. Even has direct communication with the neurological tissue and cells within the body. And so it becomes this modulator. This system as a whole becomes a modulator for being able to balance out all of the different functions that are occurring in the body, many of them simultaneously. And so it's a real core factor for homeostasis. And you hear a lot of people talking about the endocannabinoid system and its homeostatic properties. To me, this is a valuable piece, but it's not the only piece of the endocannabinoid system. Now, if we look at the receptors, a good way to classify those is to say the CB1 receptors primarily are located within the central nervous system, and the CB2 receptors are primarily located outside of the central nervous system. Now, that doesn't mean that they're exclusively there, because in fact there are CB1 receptors located all throughout the body, but the greater concentration is in the central nervous system. And the same thing holds true for CB2 receptors. They're located all throughout the body, but the greatest concentration is in the periphery. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about other things that the endocannabinoid system does, and so I'd like to highlight a couple of those. By far, the greatest capacity we have for CB2 activation. Now, remember, these are the receptors that are found within cell membranes that cause excitation, or we have some type of a response that occurs within that cell that either influences that cell directly or it is influential to a cascade of other cells. It's a communication opportunity as well as a directive opportunity within isolated or specific cells. The greatest preponderance of those exists within our immune system as a whole. Now, we all know and understand the value of immunity. We understand the importance of that. And the immune system carries a significant role, of course, in the context of our health. One of the challenges that we face, and perhaps why this is a significant feature associated with the endocannabinoid system, is because we all have our own challenges specific to immunity in our body. We're in various stages. We either have an immune system that is very capable, but we're being exposed to things that exceed our immune capability, or we have an immune system that somehow has been compromised to some extent. And when we look at the immune system as a whole, and when we look at disease and illness in this country, and in first world countries throughout the whole of our global enterprise as a company, one of the things that we see characteristically is pro-inflammatory responses in the body. Inflammation is one of the critical drivers of what we have in modern disease now. And inflammation in any of its stages can and is destructive to tissues within the body. Now, we have an inflammatory response that we can support, but we also have pain that's associated directly with that. New and emerging research now is being very specific to the CB2 receptors. Traditionally, when we've talked about pain and the modulation of pain, nociception, controlling that within the body, it's been a conversation that's been really specific about CB1 receptors. I was in a meeting the other day. Dr. Osgood Thorpe was there. I think Brandy might have been there. Some of my partners were there. But there was this discussion, and there was a question that was arising about what's the difference between CB1 and CB2 in terms of pain perception. I thought Dr. Osgood Thorpe did a good job of describing that. CB1 receptors makes it so you don't care that you're having pain. CB2 receptors, now some of you got that and understood that. CB2 receptors actually block the sequence of pain. It's a neurological sequence. It's a neurological consequence that says we need to stop this cascade. And so one is different than the other, but they both have very similar effects in that context. Now, the other thing that we know about CB2 receptors is that they affect multiple pathways associated with inflammation. And as I just mentioned, when we look at the consequence of disease and illness as it exists right now, most of these are pro-inflammatory disease processes. If I were to ask you to hold your hand up, how many of you know somebody with diabetes? Hold your hand up, keep it in the air. How many of you know somebody, keep that hand up, how many of you know somebody with arthritis? How many of you know somebody with cancer? Right? I mean, every hand in the room is up, and in most cases, both hands are up. And we can go right down the list. These are all inflammatory diseases. So learning how to control inflammation is critical. Now, at convention last year, we showed you a lot of new information that we're studying, which we're going to continue forward with now, as we look at the biological aspects of how the body reacts and responds to different essential oils. In this context, how the body reacts and responds to activation of the CB2 receptors is critical. And we know that there's multiple pathways. There's the MAPK pathway, there's the 5-LOX pathway. There's even very finite detail in talking about interruption of arachidonic acid and how it is a producer of inflammation. So in context, this is a very broad spectrum activity that we see in each one of the receptor types associated with the endocannabinoid system. Now stay with me for just a moment, because I also want to talk with you about cell protection. These are what I would call the pillars of the endocannabinoid system. Activating the body's full immune capability, having the body to be able to establish homeostasis, being able to control proper inflammation within the body, that uncontrolled inflammatory response that leads to degradation of tissue and many different types of disease and illness that we now face. But we also have, we'd add as a final pillar, this ability to be able to protect ourselves. Antioxidant capability. One of the things that we see is we see greater activation of the enzymes that are critical in protecting the body this way. And so antioxidant activity becomes this corner or a big pillar associated with what we see within the system. Now that is a foundation we can look to. Remember when I spoke a couple of years ago, and we've spoken many times since then, we said that there's 3 major types of phytocannabinoids, or cannabinoids that are developed from plants. Now in total there's about 70 or maybe a little bit more than we know of. Most of them, however, are derivatives or they're, isomers of other types of cannabinoids that you're more familiar with, like cannabidiol, or THC, or beta-caryophyllene. There's other derivatives that are associated with each one of those, although there are some unique things that are associated. And many different types of plants have cannabinoids. It's more than just the cannabis plant. It's more than just the hemp plant. It's more than just what we're talking about today, which is Copaiba. We see it in black pepper, we see it in oregano, we see it in ylang-ylang. Even some helichrysums have cannabinoids associated with them. So this is not something new. This is not introducing something to the body that is not familiar to the body already. And the effect that it can have is very dynamic within that system. Now the 3 types that we introduced, and this will be very familiar to you, we talked about cannabidiol. And cannabidiol is the context or the compound that we see that's coming directly from hemp, and that's coming from marijuana or cannabis as well. Now it's present in low quantities or not at all when you extract that. You don't get really a great deal or a large amount associated with it. And it doesn't necessarily act directly with the CB2 receptors. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Now the other problem that we have is the tetra, and I say it's a problem. This one to me truly is a significant issue for doTERRA as a whole. The THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol. This is direct interaction with CB1, which I'm not opposed to, because in low amounts, we can get some of that pain modulation and some of the other benefits that we would look for. And CB1 is more than just about pain modulation. We don't have time to go into all of that detail. However, it does interact with CB2 and CB1, but it has these psychotropic interludes associated with it. That is an illegal product for us to be involved in, and not something that I anticipate we ever will be involved in. So I'd like to carve that out and put that in stone for doTERRA right here today. that the THC component of everything we'll talk about is not something we're really going to focus on. And then I introduced a couple of years ago beta-caryophyllene, or beta-caryophyllene, you can say it either way. And this is significant because it's still a cannabinoid. Now remember, we define cannabinoids as anything that works within the endocannabinoid system. And so there are cannabinoids which your body produces naturally. There's not a great deal of them. There's only a few that have been identified. They were discovered in the early 1990s. And then there's a great deal or a great amount of phytocannabinoids that are either in our diet or other places. They are cannabinoids nonetheless because they interact with the exact same system. And we have some obvious advantages. One is that we have direct activity with the receptors. Now later on I'm going to talk about why that is so significant. And we have therapeutic amounts available. Now to me this is a really interesting thing. One of the things that I've learned through the years is that the value of essential oils, and I want you to categorize that now or cascade that out into other things. The value of nutrition, the value of almost anything that we do in terms of our health is always an issue of concentration and delivery. There's appropriate dosing. There's the right amounts. It's the right amount of chemistry in context with other chemistry. This is what beta-caryophyllene represents for us in Copaiba, which is a little bit different than what we see from some of the other phytocannabinoids that are there. So let's have for a moment a more critical conversation, and let's talk about CBD, and let's talk about Copaiba. Now I'm going to be a little more open with this than I was the last time we talked about it, because I would like for each of you to be very, very comfortable with where we are currently and with the potential of where possibly we could go to in the future. Now, most of us are familiar with CBD. Is there anybody here who is not familiar with CBD? If you are, you haven't been watching the news, you haven't been listening to the radio, you haven't been listening to your neighbors and your friends. Everybody is talking about CBD. And a lot of the information that's being delivered about CBD, I think is appropriate, to be honest with you. I think that there are some very real benefits that people are experiencing and that they're seeing with CBD. We know, for example, that it has strong effect on the cognitive functioning of the body. And so that then becomes filled with many different dynamics. We can talk about anxiety, we can talk about depression, we can talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress. We can talk about neuropathic pain, seizures. This is one of the primary things that people generally talk about, is the ability of CBD to be controlling of seizures. Now, one of the things I'll say about all of this information, while I don't disagree that people are having this experience, I think it begs a few questions. It's not so much whether or not it's happening, but rather, why is it happening and how is it happening? So let's dig in a little bit deeper and let's talk about what is CBD. What does that really look like and what it is? Now, a lot of people, I hear them talking about CBD essential oil. CBD is not an essential oil. CBD is a botanical that is isolated either from marijuana or from the hemp plant. And as an isolated compound, that in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a great thing either. Now remember some of the things that I already talked with you about. We don't know in its entirety how much is available through a natural process. That's one of the challenges that we have. And so much of the CBD that you see in the marketplace is synthetically derived. Now that poses a significant challenge because as you really start looking at the endocannabinoid system, and as you start looking at body systems as a whole, one of the things that we know, one of the things that we have understood for a long period of time now, is that when the body reacts and responds to a synthetic derivative, even if it's a good isolate, so in this case, cannabidiol being isolated, you know, we isolate things all the time. Vitamin C is an isolate. You don't just go to a vitamin C plant and pick out the vitamin C. It's not bad necessarily to isolate botanicals, but if we have to synthetically create them, that carries with it its own risks. And one of the things that we're learning in some cases, we see things respond similarly, very closely, and in other cases, they are dramatically different. Let me give you an example of that. It's in a little bit different context. You remember last year, some of the research that we showed you, biologically, we looked at the effect and pathway of different essential oils. And does the essential oil do exactly what it is that we want it to do? And we showed you what happens with doTERRA oils, and then we showed you several competitors. And one of the interesting things that we showed you was a comparison of Copaiba specifically on how in the case of doTERRA, because of the purity that exists there, and we're going to define CPTG a little bit better here in a moment, is we look at the purity that exists, which Corey talked about yesterday, and which we're all familiar with. It responds and behaves differently, and in fact, the other oils that we tested actually had the opposite effect of what it should have done. It became antagonistic to the cell, and it actually caused cell death. Now, that's an extreme example, but that's one of the reasons why in doTERRA we're concerned about the quality the way that we are. Because we know that it has implications and drivers which are antagonistic to what it is that we're trying to accomplish by using the essential oil in the first place. And so personally, I have concerns over the unnatural derivatives that are associated and found in many of the products. It is expensive to isolate. Now there's another challenge that's associated with CBD, which I'm going to be very open and very frank about. And it's a legal challenge, it's a regulatory challenge. And while I know many states have said marijuana is now legal, there are many states that have not. But in all instances, our federal government has said it is not. The other challenge that we have is that the government has also said, now I'm familiar with the Farmers Act and all the other things that are currently transpiring, but they have not come to fruition as of yet. And it is illegal for us as a company to take an extract and to put it into food as a supplement or anything else under the current federal law the way that it resides. I'm getting a good nod from Mark, so I'm thinking that's a good way to put that. I'm hoping that that is. So this becomes a regulatory challenge for us. Now set that aside from whether or not CBD has value and that CBD has a benefit. That's a challenge for us as a company because of our size. Now there was a really interesting article that was written in Time magazine. It was written by two physicians, one from New York and the other one I believe was from, they were researchers, not physicians. The other one I believe was from Columbia University. And they've specialized in doing research on and trying to bring value to CBD and some increased understanding. And they sponsored this in Time magazine. The entitlement of the article was CBD oil is everywhere, but is it really safe and healthy? And so they talked about much of what I just did. They shared with you, and they in no way were discounting to all of the benefits and everything that everyone has been receiving and the experience that they've had on a personal level. But they pointed out a couple of different things. One is they said CBD, available in shops and online, is not regulated. Now reading between the lines, not regulated is everything that I just described. There's no specificity for dosage, there's no specificity for safety, and most of them are synthetically derived. This statement is the one that surprised me. Now don't be offended if any of you are big CBD fans. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just sharing with you some of the information that's out there. I'm an equal opportunity exposer of information. They said much of the CBD in the market could be snake oil. The major reason why they're suggesting that is not because they don't see value. In fact, they're big proponents of CBD as a product in the marketplace. They just don't like the context that it currently resides in because it's completely uncontrolled and most of it is synthetically created. And it becomes an expense issue as much as a regulatory issue. So why then do we see this everywhere we go? Everything from dog treats to mascara now has CBD associated with it. And there are many companies who are currently selling CBD, what they call CBD oil. Now, I don't really have an answer for this. I will tell you, knowing what I know about science and knowing what I know about human physiology, I don't think I would choose any of these delivery methods if I were going to use CBD. If you were to ask me personally my opinion on CBD, I'm looking forward to the day where maybe we can clear up some of the regulatory environment. I'm looking forward to the opportunity where maybe, as was just illustrated in that article, where we can have more significant and meaningful research and a greater understanding of what CBD actually is and is not doing. But all of that has to be in context to produce value for us. Nonetheless, and I don't do this very often, but I can't help myself. So our leading competitor, and I promised Mark I wouldn't say Young Living, but I'm going to be honorable of that. This is what they're doing. Now we know what they're doing. I'm concerned on a couple of different levels, and I'll just point those out to you. One, they've taken CBD, and they've added it to several different products. And you can see the dosage that's associated with this: 500 milligrams, 1,500 milligrams, 500 milligrams. One of the most interesting articles that I read, papers that I read, late in the evening last night. Actually, I think it was at 3 this morning. One of the things that I read through this morning really caught me off guard. With CBD, dosage is imperative. It's critical. And although we don't know a lot about CBD in context of research and other outcomes, one of the things that was pointed out in this article was at some point it becomes proliferative of the very thing that you're trying to control. So example, one of the things that people have started talking about now with CBD and other things is cancer. And in this research article, they talked about megadosing, or not having the right dose, which they admitted and said, we don't understand what the dose is, but we know where the line is for being too much. And these are doses that are exceeding that line. And it becomes proliferating. In doTERRA, we have made a commitment to some very clear and very important things. One, and this is, by the way, another thing they're doing, they're competing against their own field. You can buy this from them under a fictitious name, and you don't get PV or you don't get anything else. And I never talk about business, so that's all I'm going to say about that. We're never going to do those kinds of things in doTERRA. Ever. We have built this company on integrity, on the value that stands for what we're doing with the essential oils. And the moment we deviate from that, I'm going to give you an invitation that you, along with myself and all of my partners, walk away. That is not what we're trying to accomplish in doTERRA. And so, which is better? Which is better? Which one should we be using? Well, let me give you a little bit more detail if I can. And so I'm going to talk now about the differences that exist between CBD and Copaiba, with everything that we've just talked about as a foundation. So one of the challenges that we have, and I do point it out as a challenge with the CBD, is that we have an isolated molecule. In isolation, a molecule in isolation works generally in isolation through pathway and other things. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the derivative of that for us was that most often that is a synthetic molecule that now is being added to a product. It's an indirect receptor activation, so there has to be a cascade of events for it to wane its influence into the system the way that we have talked about. There's inconsistent dosage, there's limited science, and it's a regulatory challenge. Now those are all the things that I use as a comparison model to Copaiba, which is complete plant chemistry. Now one of the advantages that we have with that is that Copaiba is not just beta-caryophyllene, it's not just BCP. It's BCP plus a lot of other chemistry. One of the things that we've known and we've understood about essential oils, and one of the primary differences with essential oils, is the synergistic effect we get when we use them. It's not just isolation into one singular pathway. It's not just isolation into just one cell type, or one response, or one chemical outcome within the body. It can be varied, it can be diverse, and it can be unique to the individual chemistry of the individual using the essential oil. It stands alone as a singular opportunity to approach health in a way that cannot be done any other way. And so I am going to stand with an essential oil in that regard every single time. Now, direct receptor activation, we have reasonable dosing. And the reason why we have reasonable dosing, although this is something that we're going to be discovering over the coming years, this is part of the reason why we have Dr. Osgothorpe here and why Brannick will be doing his work in the clinic and why we're moving all of that forward, so we can understand that more fully and more precisely. The truth is, we don't know exact dosing, so we've given you moderation of dosing. And when we look at the dosing associated with what we're doing in the essential oils, we've laid out a framework that says we can do 2 to 3 drops every 4 to 6 hours as a beginning point. And that falls in line with what we know physiologically. That falls in line with what we know about metabolic clearance. But that also falls in line with much of the benefit that we receive and much of the information that's now emerging, which is that more is not necessarily always better. There are currently more than 1,000 peer-reviewed studies, peer-reviewed research, talking about the benefits and the value of Copaiba essential oil. Now, by comparison, when we look at what we're doing with CBD, there's only a few studies that have really ever been done. And I'm aware of 2 that would fit into this category. One was this one, and it was talking about psychotic episodes and schizophrenia. The minimum dosage that they found to be therapeutic and effective was 1,000 milligrams. Now here's why I have concern about that. Remember what I shared a few moments ago. When it comes to CBD, dosage matters. It's critical. And the amount that we use may or may not be beneficial and may or may not be somehow antagonistic to the very process we're trying to resolve. So we might have benefits on the one hand, but we might be creating other issues and challenges on the other. The other one that was associated with that was a much smaller dosage. It was 600 milligrams. And it was very powerful in somewhat of the exact same context. But we're kind of all over the map between the 2 in terms of dosing. And so I want to do a comparison between what we see in CBD currently and what we know now through the research, these more than 1,000 studies that have been done about Copaiba. So look at the differences that we see here. In this research study, 5 milligrams was given. This is for irritable bowel syndrome. I had a compliant moment and I said attenuated debilitating discomfort. But what I really mean, I'm sorry, that's the only compliant moment. I promise I'll have all that slipped by me. This was irritable bowel syndrome. Now I'm going to tell you that Copaiba essential oil with a little bit of peppermint sounds like a great recipe for me for controlling that type of discomfort and those bowel issues that many, many people now suffer with, which, by the way, is pro-inflammatory, which is one of the pillars that we have associated with the endocannabinoid system. And you can go through the list. 25 milligrams was in another study, 50 milligrams for depression, 100 milligrams was a good modulator for seizures, and then normalized lipoproteins and diabetes. So how much is 100 milligrams? How much is 200 milligrams? Well, a drop of essential oil is about 45 milligrams. And so now do some reasonable math in your own mind. I said a little bit earlier, 2 to 3 drops, which is about 150 milligrams maximum, which is in the dosage range we know of safety, but also within the range that we see within the research on Copaiba essential oil. Now, why don't we do CBD as a company? Set aside everything I've just talked about. There's one simple reason that remains, that the other thing, challenges can be removed with time. CPTG is our big challenge. And CBD, in its current state, does not meet that standard. We will not deviate from that, no matter how popular the voice is, no matter how critical people may become because of our adherence to that, we will not deviate from CPTG. CPTG in this case and in every case delineates that we can't have analytical challenges, we can't have issues of impurity and have it meet that standard. If we were to introduce something like that now, what would that say to you? We don't really have a standard, and yet we do, and so we will not deviate in part from it. We have biological and efficacy challenges. We don't know dosing yet. And there are regulatory challenges. And so our official position is not one to be derogatory towards CBD. I started out this segment of what I'm sharing with you today talking about the value associated with CBD CBD oil. Now oil, we call it oil because it gets mixed with a carrier or another oil or other substances. I'm still going to stand on them. I think it has potential, but I will not, and none of my partners will, go against CPTG. So for the moment, can we ask you to hold? Can we ask you to pause? And be excited about what we are doing with Copaiba. So in the minutes that I have left, let's talk a little bit about Copaiba now. Now you know that we have 4 different species. I'm asked the question all the time, why 4 different species of Copaiba? Because it gives us greater capability within the essential oil itself. Not only do we have substantial amounts of the phytocannabinoid we're looking for, which is BCP, beta-caryophyllene, but we have a lot of additional chemistry. It fits perfectly into what we do in the context of our co-impact sourcing model. One of my favorite things that I think I've ever done in doTERRA was the trip that Emily and I took down to Brazil. It was everything imaginable, including Emily trying to figure out how to hide snakes in my room. Don't ever travel with her, it's not what you think it will be. The Copaiba is a unique tree. And all of the plants that we receive essential oils from in their own way carry some uniqueness. The reason I wanted to show this picture was not so I could say, oh, well, the Copaiba tree grows 100 feet tall. It's because of the gentleman who's standing in this picture. He, like so many of the people that we work with across the globe, is generational in this enterprise. It is him and his family and his associates that we're trying to impact, that we're working with, and that we're helping them to grow their ability to not only be financially stable, but to belong to something that is greater than themselves, just like doTERRA is greater than ourselves collectively. What a remarkable opportunity that is for them. And we spent a good amount of time all the way up the Amazon. I kept threatening to throw Emily out into the river with the piranhas, but she knew I probably couldn't do it, even though I wanted to a time or two. Now, the oil itself comes from a resin. I showed this picture not because I wanted you to see how studious Emily and I were at watching that resin drip out of the tree. I show this to you because that resin contains essential oil within it. It's unique as a resin because it comes out as a liquid. Now the debate is out. I read some literature that says, oh, it contains as much as 90% essential oil. And I read some research that says it contains very little essential oil. Our yield is somewhere around 40 to 50%, I believe, is what our yield is from that resin. This carries with it some unique properties. Why CPTG and our standards in doTERRA are so critical is because most of the Copaiba oil you see in the marketplace is what's coming out of that tree in that picture. It's the resin. It's because we can extend it. It's because we can get more. We don't do that in doTERRA for the same reason, in the same context that I've talked about before for CPTG. And so it's really important that we isolate the oil because it's more than just the endocannabinoid system. And it's because of all the other chemistry. Now, I've showed this slide to you before where we've talked about it's a liver protectant, it's a cardiovascular protectant, it supports the immune system, it's good for digestive support, neurological function, respiratory function. All of that is code for 3 things. It reduces inflammation, it reduces pain, and it protects the cells. The pillars and the cornerstone of why this essential oil is so critical. Copaiba, as an essential oil, is more than 98% pure sesquiterpenes. Now, I made a commitment to myself I wasn't going to talk about chemistry today, but as it turns out, I can't talk about oils without at least mentioning chemistry. The value that we have with sesquiterpenes, just so you know, and one of the things that makes this oil unique, we have another oil that's similar, and it's vetiver. Vetiver also has a substantial amount of sesquiterpenes associated with it. Sandalwood has a substantial amount of sesquiterpenes associated with it. Copaiba has a lot of sesquiterpenes associated with it. And the advantage that we have is that they last longer. They're a little slower to be metabolized, so we have longer lasting effects. But because of the complexity of the sesquiterpenes, it means that we also have opportunity that we can have secondary and tertiary metabolites that develop so that we have a diminishing point of returns over time. And while it may start out as this, as it gets metabolized, it carries its own benefits in a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary metabolic view or metabolism that happens within the body. So we get very detailed outcomes associated with it. Now, I'm only going to highlight a few in the few moments I have left. This was a really interesting study that was done, and it talks about damage to the neurological tissue. Damage that happened, in this case, subsequent to a stroke. But there's lots of things that can damage our tissues, isn't there? Poor nutrition, toxicity, bad outcomes associated with free radicals. There's a number of different things that anytime, remember what I said, we have inflammation in the body, we have damage to the tissues. And so we know that when we have damage to the tissue, we have an intense inflammatory response. And in this case, part of the response was happening with the immune cells, the neutrophils, to be very specific. And they themselves are releasing free radicals. We're causing more damage to the tissues. And other inflammatory cytokines also are released in that process, all of which are focused around not just the initial insult to the tissue, but there is a secondary insult that comes to the tissue. And what they showed, and they showed it because of the protective sequence here, because of beta-carophylline, they showed this protective sequence where it protected against that oxidative stress. It protected against that inflammatory response for the surrounding tissues as they were under attack, as is part of the body's process. But what they showed was they could actually more quickly heal and reverse the damage that was associated with those primary type events that are so damaging, like a stroke. Now I look at that and I think to myself, well, how many of you are going to have a stroke today? Hopefully none of us. But we're all going to be associated with pro-inflammatory markers in our body. We're going to be exposed to toxicity. We're going to be exposed to poor nutrition. We're going to have free radical damage. We're going to have uncontrolled inflammation in one regard or another. This is the progression of disease that we see. And so this, I felt like, became applicable in a greater context to what we see with Copaiba and the value that it brings. It had a synergistic effect. Now remember what I said, when we isolate chemistry, we have singular compounds that are functioning and working. However, with the essential oils, one of the things that we have seen over and over again is their synergistic effect. And there was an acute reduction in the microglial, neutrophil, and macrophage activity. In other words, the inflammation at the site stopped, and healing could then begin more fully. Now, we talk a lot about inflammation cofactors. This is where the relevance is for each one of us. And last year at convention, we talked a lot about inflammation. And so I'm going to give you a reminder of another essential oil that we have that I'm proposing would be good to use in context with the Copaiba. And of course, it's turmeric. Now remember, turmeric as an essential oil is different than turmeric as a botanical. And turmeric as an essential oil, we talked a lot about all the tumerones that it has. And we talked about it being neuroprotective. It protected the cells of the body. And specifically, I isolated and spoke about the neurology of the body, the neurochemistry of the body. And so here's the first suggestion I would like to make for you. because we all have those 4 factors ever present in our life of nutrition and stress and inflammation and free radical damages. Combine 2 drops of Copaiba, 2 drops of turmeric, and take in a capsule, 1 in the morning and 1 in the evening. I would expect for 2 things to begin to happen. One is you'll start to feel notably better. If you're having pain, it will begin to ease some of that discomfort. And that will happen in sequence and as a consequence associated with the body beginning to repair itself and controlling those damaging sequences. It will also act as a way for your body to support itself against free radical damage. It'll become a cell protectant for you. I believe this is an everyday essential oil. Now here's a few other suggestions I can give to you today. Internal use. Now we know we can use this topically, aromatically, and internally, but here's my recommendations for Copaiba. Use, if you just want to use Copaiba itself, use it in the morning and use it in the evening. 2 drops, 3 drops in a capsule, or take our Copaiba soft gel every night and every morning. Taking 1 or 2 drops under the tongue is a good idea because we get a systemic consequence prior to hard metabolism that goes through the liver. So it's just an issue of pathway. So if I'm looking for more of a whole body opportunity, under the tongue becomes a great way to think about using the essential oils. Now I know I'm oversimplifying some of these things, but that is what we're looking for within them. Use 1 drop of Copaiba and peppermint. I talked about this already for digestive support. Or frankincense and lemongrass and Copaiba for liver support. I like all 3 of those in context one with another because of how they can be supportive of the liver. Now about the other 2 ways that we can use them, aromatically and internally. Acne. Most people don't think about that in the context of Copaiba, but it has a lot of qualities topically for use on the skin. Not just for irritation and pain, but also for clarifying the skin. So I like using Copaiba with 1 drop of melaleuca directly over the affected area. Or add Copaiba to a face wash or your face scrub. Think about using it topically in that context. Now there's other ways and other reasons we can use it topically as well. For skin irritations, the yarrow palm, are you loving that essential oil combination? Adding a little bit of Copaiba to that and using that in the skin applications is going to be really good. I read a lot of research over the last several months that has been talking about a lot of the autoimmune conditions that we see within the skin. Things like psoriasis and other things. And the effect and the value, and there's all kinds of detail that goes into that, but that comes from Copaiba essential oil. So combining Copaiba with yarrow palm, which has similar benefits, can be a great opportunity for you. And then for pain, of course, applying it directly over the area. Now I'm going to give you a reason to dilute the Copaiba essential oil. And the reason to dilute is so that we can hold it, localize it right within the tissues where we are. Now, if I'm having more of a global response associated with pain, I might consider taking it within a capsule. But if it's localized, I've hurt my knee or it's my shoulder, apply it topically over that area and dilute it so that it remains in those tissues for longer periods of time. It will begin to metabolize, we'll have an enzymatic response localized right within those tissues. So that's a great way you can now start using Copaiba. And then, of course, lastly, how we'll use it aromatically. Now, I have given you some of my favorite ways to combine Copaiba in an aromatic usage model. And I'll close with this by saying that I really don't care how it is that we use the essential oils. Honestly, I don't. There was a time where I was very specific and identified very clearly, do exactly this and be exactly this way. And there's times for us to be that specific. But in a general sense, my challenge to you is, along with me, to come back to the basics. Let's get back to who we are. And who we are is avid users of essential oils. And who we are is purists with essential oils. And who we are is the world's leader in essential oils. Would you agree with me? Thank you for being with me this morning. I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. I'll be coming to as many of your places as I possibly can. And I'm looking forward to the next 3 years with you.